Well, good evening and welcome to NASA Space Network, sponsored by NASA and the Maryland STEM Festival, hosted by Carroll County Public Library with support from the Maryland State Library. Next slide. We're going to take care of a little bit of housekeeping before we introduce our very special guest this evening. I'm Dorothy Stoltz with the Carroll County Public Library, and we also have with us Shelby O'Leary, who will be doing our behind the scenes tech production for tonight's program. I'm also serving as the board president for the Maryland STEM Festival. So with our online housekeeping, if you're joining us by Zoom, use the Q&A to type in your questions. So if you hover your cursor at the bottom of the screen, you'll see the icon Q&A, and just click on that. The window will pop up, type in your question. If you're joining us by Facebook, please use the chat box. And we're going to get to as many questions as we can this evening. And also to let you know that tonight's program is being recorded, and it will be posted to Carroll County Public Library's YouTube page tomorrow. Okay, next slide. So before I introduce Derek, I'd like to thank two divisions of NASA, the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center here in Maryland, as well as the NASA Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The Maryland STEM Festival, as some of you may know, is in its 6th year, and it is a month-long celebration of STEM. This year it started October 2nd and will run through November 1st. And if you go to the website, you're going to find hundreds and hundreds of activities. Everything from preschool science to a variety of activities like the one tonight. So I'd like to promote two more NASA programs. One is this Friday evening, October 16th, and that will be on robotic servicing. We also have on October 21st, and that'll be 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It'll be a conversation with astronaut Ricky Arnold. And Ricky Arnold is originally from Maryland, so we're looking forward to that. So thanks again to Carroll County Public Library and the Maryland State Library. But we have also co-hosts. 13 library systems across the state are co-hosting tonight's program. So we want to give special thanks to them, including library systems from Allegheny, Anne Arundel, Calvert, Caroline, Cecil, Hartford, Howard, Kent, Prince George's, Queen Anne, Somerset, Washington, and Wicomico. So now I'd like to introduce Dr. Derek Artemis, who is the mission manager for NASA's Kennedy Space Center. Let's please welcome Dr. Artemis.
Thank you. Just first and foremost, want to say thank you to everyone for participating and inviting me to come speak at this. It's definitely a great privilege on my part. So I'm actually a Goddard Space Flight Center employee there in Maryland. I just reside here in Florida. One of the nice things about our team is we have communication systems all over the world, and we're definitely spread out all over the United States at different NASA centers. So I reside at Kennedy, but I'm up in Maryland quite a bit. So it is definitely an honor to be invited here to speak. Before I get started, feel free to interrupt me at any time with any questions, comments, or concerns. I'll try to stop periodically, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end. But anytime, feel free just to stop me and ask a question. All right. So a little bit about me. As Dorothy had introduced, I am a mission manager for what we call the Human Spaceflight Communications and Tracking Network. So what is that? So from Human Spaceflight, you might put together that we support all the different NASA human spaceflight missions. So starting back to the Apollo days when they had the moon landings, to the space shuttle. That's all human space flight program. The International Space Station, or the ISS, is all International Space Station, or is a human space flight program. And then the new Artemis and Gateway programs that are going to the moon, back to the moon, and also future lunar crewed missions. So the communications and tracking network, they provide the ability for those different spacecraft and the astronauts above the spacecraft to communicate back with mission control at Johnson Space Center in Houston, and then also to a lot of different centers all across the United States and a lot of centers across the world. We work with a lot of international partners. My job as a mission manager, I'm responsible for overseeing all the different missions and how we support them. So, for example, if a new spacecraft or space vehicle were to be developed that would carry astronauts to either the ISS or to the moon, we would work with them in the very beginning to help them with the design and build up of their spacecraft, and to enable them to communicate with our antennas and all of our ground networks across the United States and across the world. So I manage that from the beginning to the end. So I do all the, I help with all the design. Then I also I sit console in the control center, and I lead a team spread out across the United States that manage all the different assets. And I lead them through the launch. A lot of launches are from Kennedy Space Center, and then a lot of them are from Wallops in Virginia. And then as they go to the International Space Station, or just orbiting the Earth, or to the lunar missions that will be occurring in a few years. So I've got a wide background in RF, or radio frequency communications. It's what allows spacecrafts and our ground antennas to communicate wirelessly. So I've majored in that for all my degrees, which is part of electrical engineering. So if anyone out there is wanting to do any type of communications or any type of electrical engineering topics, just let me know. Feel free to ask questions and I can answer them. And this here is a picture of me when I actually worked for Boeing. So I'll talk a little bit more, I think, on the next slide, but I started out working for Boeing at the Kennedy Space Center when I graduated college. And then I started out as a test engineer, and then for the International Space Station program. And then I worked for a program also with Boeing, where we developed a new spacecraft that the purpose was to return crew back to the ISS. And if you remember, back when the space shuttle retired back in 2011, it left the United States without a capability to launch its own astronauts from its own U.S. soil. So I was a part of a team that was developing that spacecraft to help restore that capability. All right. So previous experience, I talked a little bit about my International Space Station program as a Boeing employee. I was a radio frequency or RF test engineer and avionics test engineer. And really what a test engineer does is we work with the people that design the equipment and build the equipment, and we're responsible for testing it to make sure that the equipment that we're testing, which usually goes on a spacecraft or some kind of space vehicle that'll be launched and be put into space, can meet the rigorous environments that it's subjected to. So for instance, like when things got to launch on a launch vehicle, they have to be able to take a lot of G-forces and a lot of vibration. And then when they're on orbit, it's not bumpy or anything, but it gets hot, and it's also in a vacuum environment where there isn't any atmosphere. So we have to do all types of environmental testing and electrical testing to make sure that it can survive. So that's really what I did starting out. And I did that for my first 4 years. And then I moved on to the Starliner program, which was the name of the spacecraft. I was one of the lead RF test engineers, and I was also responsible for developing the ground network to communicate with the different control centers, and then a lot of the Goddard Space Network ground equipment. And that's where I became familiar with a lot of the people and the equipment at Goddard and across the Space Network. And then in 2012, I got hired by NASA at Kennedy Space Center where I worked the Commercial Crew Program, which is the official name for the program that is designing and building up both the Boeing Starliner and the SpaceX Dragon 2 spacecraft, which both launch astronauts from U.S. soil, both at Kennedy Space Center, and dock with the International Space Station so they can send new crew, new supplies, new cargo, things like that. And it can also send down old things that need to be repaired or fixed or thrown out. So it's a way to replenish and recycle things on the International Space Station. And then so I worked for NASA Kennedy Space Center for, let's say, probably 4 years until 2018. Actually, no, 2019. And then I hired on with Goddard Space Flight Center there in Maryland. So that's what I've been working with since then. And this here is a picture of me out of college. I look a little bit younger and don't have a beard or anything like that. So it's definitely younger. I was sitting in the cockpit of, I think it was Space Shuttle Atlantis. So that was me, which was definitely a quite honor. They have to, if you look here, they got like the blue suits that they have, they're called bunny suits. They're there to make sure that none of the particles or dust or particulates that we bring in are left in the cockpit of the space shuttle. All right. And then we get into really the space network and the space communications. So as I mentioned before, the space communications, and here we have different satellites. So we have space communications, which we have 3 different main groups, which are the near Earth network, and those are all ground stations or antennas that are strategically placed around the Earth to provide near continuous coverage to spacecraft in low Earth orbit, which is like under 400 kilometers, which is kind of what the International Space Station is as far as orbiting the Earth. And then you have the space network, and these are what we call TDRS, Tracking Data Relay Satellite System. So we have probably a dozen or so different TDRS satellites that make up the space network, and they all orbit the Earth in a geosynchronous pattern, which is roughly 40,000 kilometers or so away from the Earth. And these all have antennas that can look back towards the Earth and move and point. That way you can provide pristine and precise coverage to different like robotics missions, like CubeSats, even weather balloons that are near the Earth but providing weather, and also all the human spaceflight stuff, which are the spacecrafts and the ISS, which is what I work on. And then you have the Deep Space Network, which there are, I think, 3 different ground stations. They're really, really, really big dishes, similar to what you would see with DirecTV dishes, but 100 times the size. So, and they need to be that size. That way you can provide communications to a lot of different space science missions, like all the different the Mars rovers and the things that go way out into the solar system. They all use the Deep Space Network to communicate. And the space communications and the near Earth network, the space network, and the Deep Space Network is all under what we call the Space Communications and Navigation Program, or what we call SCAN. You can Google it, look it up. It's a part of NASA that's headquartered out of NASA headquarters in DC, not too far from you guys. But they oversee the implementation and the upkeep of the near Earth network, the space network, and the Deep Space Network. All right. And please feel free to stop me anytime if you guys have any questions.
All right. Derek, we do have a few questions for you already.
All right. Excellent.
Okay. From Tim, we have, did you always want to work in space like when you were a kid? What did your parents and others think of your aspirations? And the last part of his question is, what kinds of things did you do in school and outside of school to get ready for the job you have?
Yeah, definitely. So the first question, I was always, as you can see, I had 3 degrees in electrical engineering. So as a kid, I was always intrigued by electronics. So I was always taking things apart, trying to put them back together, trying to build silly things that never really worked. But I was always curious and like taking apart things and putting them back together and trying to understand how they worked was just something that I loved doing. I mean, my parents didn't appreciate it because I often took apart a lot of their stuff and couldn't put it back together, but that's a different story. So I was always into electrical things. And I grew up actually in Ohio. And when I moved down here to Florida, when I was 11 or 12, I was intrigued by the NASA shuttle launches. Seeing that, up in Ohio, you didn't really have any of that. You had Glenn up there in Cleveland, but you couldn't really see any launches. So when I moved down here and we started to go see launches, I mean, that was it for me. I was hooked. So seeing that firsthand, coupled with like my love for electronics, that kind of steered me towards like even like a late high school, early college. I never really changed my major. I think I changed from like computer engineering over to electrical engineering, but it was still, I always knew that I wanted to do something with electronics. And then when I moved to Florida, it was really space. So that's how I got started with that. And from as far as like kind of setting yourself up and the things to do. So try to figure out some people don't figure out what they want to do early on. Luckily for me, I kind of grew up knowing I want to do something in electronics. Some people don't really learn until they get into college and they experiment with a few different majors till they really see what they want to do. But just really make sure you do something that you love, you enjoy. As you start going through your coursework in college, you can kind of tell, I don't know if I'm going to like this, or you will, and then you'll want to pursue it. Another big thing I would recommend is like internships. I mean, it doesn't have to be or co-ops. They offer a good experience for you to get kind of firsthand look and knowledge and experience with a career field you want to go in. And then from that, you can really tell this is something I want to do, or perhaps it isn't. So I would say, pay attention to coursework. Make sure you love what you do. It's definitely important to love what you do, and then also do some internships. That's really, hopefully I answered the questions. I would say definitely do internships. That would be the one thing I would recommend. That way you have a good basis and an understanding if you really want to go in that career field or not.
That's great. Let's take one more question at this
Sure.
point. Nicholas is asking, what is an Oort cloud? That's OORT. And then Aiden is following up, how does it work?
An Oort cloud. I honestly have no idea.
Yeah, it's OORT.
I don't know. I can look that up and I can get back with you on that. That I'm not sure of. I haven't heard of that.
Sounds good. Well, why don't we go on to the next question? What kind of systems redundancy are there for critical systems failure backups?
Yeah. So one of the things that we always try to do and we always look into is like we always think of, okay, what could fail next? So one of the things that we do, like I haven't got to it yet, but part of our overall network is like the ground, kind of like internet communications, if you will, between the centers and the ground terminals. So we always try to have redundant paths, like kind of like redundant internet paths or communication paths between the control centers and the ground antenna terminals, not only from multiple paths, but also we try to have them like what we call a diverse routing. So you want to have some that take paths one way across the United States, and then you want to have another that takes another path. We've had instances where we've had fiber lines and internet lines between control centers, between NASA centers, cut by just people doing maintenance or digging, and it actually caused launch delays and scrubs. So we try to have diversity that way. That's from a ground network perspective. Now, from a communications perspective, we always try to work with the spacecraft provider to make sure that they have redundant like systems and hardware on their spacecraft. And then from like for our space-based, we always try to have users scheduled on different satellites and different services, and we have quick ways developed and ready to go, and we have procedures ready to go in case there isn't an issue, how we can react quickly and restore service if there is an outage.
Well, that's great. And
Yeah.
why don't we take just one more? How does the Boeing, and it's the CST-100 Starliner, abort, it says abort systems work?
Yeah, so they have, and I can't get into too much detail because it's their proprietary or their own information, so I don't want to devolve too much into it. But they have different ways to like push and basically jettison themselves off their launch vehicle, which is the Atlas V. So they have onboard software that'll on both the launch vehicle Atlas V and the Starliner CST-100 spacecraft that can detect off nominal situations to where they may have to abort. And then if it's an abort that is detected, there's systems and engines that will basically fire and push them off of the launch vehicle.
That's great. And that was from Roland, and he's also just asking, did you ever want to be an astronaut or just always an engineer?
You know, being an astronaut never really crossed my mind. I had a lot of friends that actually applied because over the past few years they've had a lot of different offerings and a lot of different people apply. I had a couple friends that actually made it almost to the final selection. That isn't really something that had really intrigued me. I liked like the design and the building and the testing aspect more. But I definitely wouldn't mind flying in space though.
That's great. Well, why
Yeah.
don't you continue with your presentation, and then we'll come back to some more questions.
Sure. So this slide here, we have what we call the Networks Integration Management Office, or what we call NEMO. And really what that does is, and that's actually the group that I'm part of, it allows us to integrate or put together and represent all these different NASA space systems, like the Deep Space Network, the Near Earth Network, and then the Space Network, the TDRS system. We represent our those different networks to the different spacecraft customers. So like if SpaceX came to us and said, hey, we have a new spacecraft, we need to use the space network, TDRS, and then the Deep Space Network, can you help us with that? So we would assist them with the design, we'd assist them with the tests, the certification, and we just act as that interface. We integrate both the customer and then all of our different networks together. So you have to know a lot about spacecraft design, communication systems design to be able to help the customers out. But you also have to know a lot about our side and the Near Earth Network, Space Network, and the Deep Space Network, a lot of their comm systems too. So that you can talk and help the customer with interfacing the two. All right. This is a slide just on human spaceflight. I think I talked a lot about human spaceflight, but I mean, just in general, it's from a NASA perspective, it progresses us forward as a humanity, and it's always important to build a presence in space. That's one of the things the ISS does. It kind of allows us to run experiments both on humans and then planets and different scientific missions right there, so that we can see how things react both short-term and long-term in the presence of space. So that'll help us, like it's an incremental build up to the low Earth orbit where ISS is, up to long-term lunar and then long-term Mars missions. So that's the importance of human spaceflight. And then the network, the Human Spaceflight Common Tracking Network, the network that I work for, we're a big part of that because we provide the communications between all the ground elements and the control centers here, and the flight controllers and the flight directors that orchestrate and run those missions. And then we provide it between them and then the spacecraft themselves and then the astronauts. So, all right. I think I talked a lot about my role, but I'll just reiterate it. So I'm responsible for integrating both all the different elements of the Near Earth Network, Space Network, and the Deep Space Network, and then with the spacecraft providers like SpaceX, Boeing, Lockheed, things like that, through all the entire what we call the mission life cycle. So the mission life cycle, you'll hear a lot in NASA terms. It's really the mission life cycle is when you start out, you start with the requirements development, and then from those requirements, you start building up and designing spacecraft and spaceflight hardware. And then once you have it designed and you think you met the requirements, you put it to the test. So you test it, and there's testing can last months to years because you have different environments tests. You have tests all the different propulsion systems, the engines, the environmental control life systems that provide air and stabilization to crew and make sure that they can survive the environments of space. It's all the different electronic stuff and communication stuff which I work on. So you have to test all those things out individually, and then you have to do them integrated for long term. So, and I manage the concept of operations, all the requirements, and all the pre-mission integration, and like the operations, like I talked about before. I sit console in the control center and lead an integrated team through like the pre-launch testing, through the actual launch event, and then I lead a team through what they call rendezvous and docking with the International Space Station, and then also the undock and landing stuff. So we support it all. And just some of the missions that we support: the ISS, International Space Station, the Commercial Crew Program, which is the Boeing and the SpaceX spacecraft, Artemis, which is the new test flights for the lunar missions, and then any new lunar or Martian programs. All right, and then so who do I work with? I definitely talked about the Near Earth network, the space network, and the DSN. They kind of stick out in the forefront because they're the ones that provide the direct interfacing between the spacecraft and the control center, so they get a lot of attention. But we also have what we call the Search and Rescue Office, which is based and managed out of Goddard. And what you can see here on the screen with the inner tube and a pool. So the search and rescue, they have different beacons that the crew can wear on their astronaut outfit, and they can also be on the spacecraft. And even private boats, vessels, cruise ships, they all have kind of the same beacons. And basically what they serve as a distress signal, that if, for instance, if there was some kind of an abort or anomalous condition to where the spacecraft had to go down and land in the water, they would have a way to communicate and a way for us to find them. So that's what the Search and Rescue Office does. And then you have NASA's Flight Dynamics facility, which what that does is it takes the spacecraft location from like either SpaceX or Boeing or the control center, and it tells our communication assets, the Near Earth network and the space network, where to point our antennas, either on the ground or in space back towards the Earth, to provide the spacecraft with communications for both commanding and then voice. And then NASCOM is NASA Communications, and that's really the interconnectivity on the ground between the control centers, the ground stations, things like that. All right. Are there any other questions before I continue on?
Yes, we have from Facebook, we have Christina saying that she thinks that the Oort is a cloud of asteroids and comets outside the solar system, and it's named after a particular person. And I think that Oort name, O-O-R-T, is Dutch.
Okay.
Yeah. And we have Bridget asking, what is your favorite rocket and why?
So probably the one that's being developed now, the SOS. Part of it is I'm working pretty close with it, so it's near and dear to my heart. So I know a lot about it, and I'm really excited for it to launch in the coming year. But it's also just from a sheer, it's one of the largest rockets that's being produced. So it's definitely got a lot of thrust and a lot of size to it, and it's going to be meant to take things to the lunar outposts and things like that. So based on sheer size, thrust, and also the fact that I'm working on it now, so definitely near and dear to me.
That's great. And we'll take one more question right now. Maribel is asking, is your work hard?
It can be. I enjoy it, so I put a lot of time and effort into it. But with anything that you enjoy, a lot of times it doesn't seem like work. You can get frustrated from time to time, but so can anything. So you just got to take the good with the bad. But overall, I enjoy it. It does get hard. A lot of times it's technically challenging, but just the fact that I tend to be more technical in nature, so I kind of welcome that, to be honest. So it can get hard, both technically and when you manage people as well. So.
That's great. And we're getting a lot of great comments that people are enjoying this. And someone who says that they're 6 years old, they're saying they're really appreciating the pictures, and looks like you have plenty of fun at work.
I do. It's definitely a privilege to come and work with at NASA every day. So I love it. I'm definitely fortunate. I'm actually my wife. She worked for NASA as well. So we work sometimes a lot of the same things. So we have some interesting conversations both at work and off of work. So it surprisingly never gets old. So
That's great. That's great. So why don't we continue on a little bit then?
Okay, perfect. Just to talk a little bit about our partners, I think I talked a little bit about this, but obviously, NASA Johnson Space Center, JSC, it's, in a lot of the movies, a lot of the space movies as being the control center, which is true. The MCC, or the Mission Control Center, where they do all the human spaceflight missions and all the astronaut training and everything, is all based out of Johnson there in Houston. Kennedy Space Center, where I actually reside, they're responsible for launching a lot of all human spaceflight missions, NASA human spaceflight missions, and a lot of NASA science missions as well. And then Jet Propulsion Laboratory, or JPL, they actually manage the Deep Space Network. So we work hand in hand with them to make sure that our control centers and spacecraft customers can communicate via the Deep Space Network managed out of JPL. All right, International Space Station, I talked a little bit about this, so I won't touch too more on it, but it is a habitable laboratory up 250 miles above the Earth. You can see it at different points in different locations, depending on how clear the sky is and where you're located on the globe. We provide communications to that almost, I don't want to say 24/7, but it's pretty near continuous coverage, especially when they do their extracurricular vehicular activities, or EVAs, which are more or less just astronaut spacewalks that go and install new things on the station or go and fix things like you see the astronaut here fixing. It's home to a number of astronauts that live there in rotation full time, and a lot of different science experiments as well. All right, another slide on the space station. So from a human spaceflight common tracking HSICTN perspective, we've been supporting it since its inception. The comm used to go all through the space shuttle when it was docked to it at the early stages, and then after a period of time, the International Space Station, ISS, built its own capability to communicate directly with us. So we've been supporting them since its inception. First, it was the space shuttle that brought crew and cargo to the ISS. Now it'll be the Dragon and soon to be the Starliner spacecrafts that are built under the Commercial Crew Program at NASA. Right, and then I talked about this, the Commercial Crew Program, a little bit earlier, but I'll talk a little bit more about it now. And really, what the whole purpose of the Commercial Crew Program was to really return the United States astronauts' launch capability back to U.S. soil. So since we retired the space shuttle back in 2011 without any real viable alternative to return our own crew back from our own soil, so we've had to rely on the Russian Soyuz for the last 9 years or so. And it wasn't until this past May when the Demo 2 or DM2 mission launched and returned astronauts in the Dragon 2 spacecraft. And this is, if you look at the picture in the background, that's actually the Dragon 2 spacecraft with its top lifted, and it's about to dock with the International Space Station. All right. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the Demo 2, or Demo Mission number 2, or DM2, so it was the first crewed mission under the Commercial Crew Program, and the first one since the space shuttle ended in 2011. So DM2 really marked the beginning of returning astronauts to the ISS from the U.S. soil. So it's a very big milestone. We have another one coming up on Halloween, October 31st. So I'll be up there at Goddard in Maryland, supporting the different space networks all over the United States supporting this launch. All right, and then Artemis. I haven't talked a whole lot of Artemis, so I'll spend some time on that. So that's the new moon program that NASA has. So we're actually going to be putting the first woman on and the next man on the moon. The goal is to do it by 2024. So we have a different series of Artemis launches, like Artemis 1, 2, 3, 4, that all have different goals and different objectives that work towards putting the first woman on the moon in 2024. The SLS rocket, which I said was my favorite before, that's a major part of the Artemis program. And the Artemis program consists of the Orion spacecraft, which is really the biggest capsule that has been produced thus far. So that's exciting. And it will launch on the SLS. It'll start out by doing like the test missions. We'll do orbits around the moon, and then orbits around Earth, different orbital trajectories to practice how it's going to return and come back and land, do a water landing. So there's a lot of different Artemis missions that will prove out a lot of different concepts required for the first woman landing on the moon in 2024. And then from a Goddard Space Network perspective, we play a key role in providing the communications both on the ground and in space, and we work with JPL because they'll play a major part too with their deep space network. All right, I wanted to stop before I go on the Gateway. Are there any other questions?
Yes, the questions keep rolling in. Victoria is asking, what is NASA's next goal as in visiting Mars further? Talked about Artemis, but anything beyond that at this point?
Yeah, so I think in a couple slides I have a little bit on the Martian missions, but I'll talk the next big thing right now, and the next big push by NASA is both Artemis and Gateway, which I have up here. So Artemis is really designing, building, testing, and not only on the ground test, but tests through launches, orbits, things like that, both around the Earth and the Moon, testing out the different missions, the different vehicles, the different capabilities, and making sure that they meet the objectives to get the crew and cargo there safely. So that's one big thing. And then the next big thing is the Gateway. And you can kind of see in the picture in the background, on the right-hand side, you have the Orion capsule with its solar rays, which is slowly approaching, and you can see the moon there. So all this is in a lunar orbit. So you have the Orion spacecraft gonna go up to and dock to what we have here, which is the Gateway. And the Gateway consists of three big elements: a power propulsion element, which is what we call PPE, habitation and logistics outposts, Halo, and then some other logistics. So you'll have the Orion, which will bring crew and cargo and help build this up, kind of like what we did with the space shuttle and the ISS. So that the Orion will bring the different elements that will be built, and a lot of these elements will not only come on Orion, but also will be launched on separate launch vehicles as well, and ejected and put into a lunar orbit to meet up, and so we can build it, much like we did with the ISS. And what this will do is that'll act as kind of a staging post or an outpost, to where you'll have what we have, I think, on the next slide, a human lander system, which companies are building up to descend from the Gateway down to the lunar surface, much like you had in Apollo. But the crew will be here; they'll be living here for a little while, coming to and from Earth via the Orion capsule, and then they'll go to and from the moon via the human landing system, which is HLS, which I'll talk about on the next slide. So that's really, that's what we have for kind of the near term, next 5-10 years or so lunar. And then this Gateway will also serve as kind of a not a halfway point, but an outpost for Martian missions later on. So it's kind of serves two different purposes. The near term is lunar. The next longer term will be Martian missions.
You know, it's real interesting the different names you have for these different projects. And Molly was asking, I think you had mentioned NEMO previously.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so NEMO, the Networks Integration and Management Office, is a group in Goddard, which is the group that I work for, and they manage the different missions, and they help and they integrate and basically allow the spacecraft customers and users and the spacecraft themselves, like the SpaceX Dragon, the Boeing, Starliner, Orion. We make sure that the users, that are people that are testing that and designing and building that up, can successfully talk to the actual communication networks. So we serve as that middleman, both having knowledge of the spacecraft and then our ground systems and antennas and stuff on the NASA side, to make sure that they communicate successfully. Because the comm system you have to have is really twofold. You have to have both the sender and the receiver talking, synchronized, and operating properly, or else nothing will work. So then that's what we do. And a lot of these names, unfortunately, change quite a bit. With different people that come in, they change the names and stuff. Fortunately, NEMO has stayed pretty consistent name-wise. So good.
That's great. And one more question before you continue. And this one is kind of a broad question here. And it's from Nicholas asking, when or will the next universe, like when does the next universe, this universe end and the next universe begin, I guess? Yeah.
Hopefully no time soon. That, there has probably been, there's probably a lot of research going on right now, and I think that's probably one of the more sought after questions. I don't know if it's fortunate or not that I don't have that answer. I don't know if I would want to know it if I did have it, but hopefully no time soon. Hopefully these NASA missions are, keep going, long after I'm gone and, well into the future. But then space exploration is around for the long term, but hopefully no time soon.
That's great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I talked Gateway, human landing system. I talked a little bit about that, but I'll talk a little bit more. So we have 3 companies right now, Blue Origin, Dynetics, and SpaceX, which is all developing different kinds and different flavors of human landing systems that will basically go from Gateway, which is the orbiting, lunar orbiting outpost where everything will be staged and entered and departed from, down to the lunar surface. So we'll provide communications. The Goddard and the NASA team will provide it directly to the human landing system, or human landing system, throughout all different phases, while it's orbiting the moon, while it's docked to the gateway, and also while it's making its descent down for human landing on the moon. So we'll be part of all of that. All right. And then let me play this video here. You guys see it?
Yes, looks great. Okay. Derek, are you still with us? The video stopped.
I am. And I believe I forgot to share the audio.
Okay.
Can you guys hear any of that audio on the video?
I did not hear the audio.
I apologize for that. You want me to replay it?
Sure. Or
Okay.
maybe even start it. We were about halfway through.
Okay. And how do I share the audio again? Let's see. Can you guys still see my screen here?
We don't see your screen.
Okay.
I think you need to reshare.
Yes. Let me do that real quick. All right. Can you guys see it now?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. Let's see. For some reason, I don't have the option to share the audio.
Okay. Well, would you want to just maybe narrate a little bit?
Yeah, let me, 1 second. Let me try to.
Sure.
This is definitely a cool video. All right. For some reason, I can't find the option. All right, I'll narrate. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Yes.
All right. So here we're just going through the old Apollo missions. Here's the Artemis program we talked about. Let's talk about the different objectives and challenges going to the moon. Here's the Orion crew module, which I talked about a little bit. So here's the launch abort system, which I talked about. We had a question earlier about the Starliner with the Orion launch abort system that can actually pull the astronauts away. So it's a pull system, it's a push. Then here's the SOS that I talked about earlier. So it's a little taller, definitely more powerful than Saturn V. Now we're talking about the different requirements and objectives that the test missions will have. And right now, they have to do a lot of different tests, different checks to make sure that the systems are operating properly, orbiting the Earth before they actually give a go to go what they call a lunar injection, which basically puts it into a speed and a trajectory to escape Earth's gravity, then go over to for lunar insertion. And here we just have 7 or so days for the journey, lunar journey. And now they're getting into the pre-stage in which we talked about with the Gateway program. So here's the Gateway here. We have like the propulsion elements, different habitats for the astronauts to live and the crew to live in. And they're just explaining that a lot of it will be like at one point the goal will be like to be like ISS, where it's constantly and regularly by men and women. They're conducting both human and scientific experiments to test and see how things adapt and live long term in lunar orbit. Here's the Orion docking to the Gateway, which I talked about before. And then here, coming down, you have the Human Lander System, or the HLS, which is and then the space network and all of our networks will be providing communications to all these different vehicles throughout this entire process and mission flow. Now, this is just a return back. So they got to circle back around the moon to get to vector and a speed and velocity to escape the lunar orbit, head back to Earth. An important thing is the spacecraft always orients itself with the bottom face heat, which is what they call the heat shield. And it can withstand temperatures of 5,000 degrees. Right. And it ended with a nice little pitch. So. All right. I apologize for the audio. I don't know why I got it working before, but for some reason I couldn't get it to turn on this time. I do apologize. Hopefully the narrating was good enough to get an idea of what was going on. Well, we actually talked about a lot of what was said in the video as far as like what the Artemis program does, its objectives, how they design, build, test, then they do all the test flights, then you bring in Gateway and then the human landing system. So it was just a nice cartoon video and with that verbalized all that. All right. Back to. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes. We're back
all right.
up.
Excellent. You can hear me fine?
Yes.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. So the last slide and what the video and I think I touched on a little bit earlier was really the moon to Mars. So the question came up earlier what the short, long-term goals are, and really it's to establish a presence around the moon, and to not only put the first woman and return the men back to the lunar surface, but also to build up a kind of an outpost, a lunar outpost, if you will, to serve as kind of a stopping area for later flights and missions to Mars. So, I'm sure people are familiar with the different Martian rovers that have been sent to the Mars to photograph, take soil, do different geological or geological different studies. We provide communications with all that through the Deep Space Network, but they will be developing different spacecraft and technologies to allow for the long transit to Mars. So some of the important things that you got to consider is, oxygen. It's hard to take enough with you. The same with water. So you got to determine a way to harvest it and create it there with the existing elements and the environments that are currently at Mars. Shelter. So the weather and the environments can get pretty rough on the Martian surface. So you got to build a shelter and habitats that are strong enough to withstand that. But also you have to build it so you can actually take it there from the Earth's surface and build it up there. So that's challenging it on itself. Touchdown. So you got to make sure you can build spacecraft that can land successfully and then also relaunch out of there to bring crew off it. Spacesuits, which they got to design very robust and specific spacesuits for the Martian environment, and then also the communications, which what we do now. But we do very small data rates, or not a whole lot of data is sent back and forth. We do send images and stuff, but I mean, really, for astronauts and crew to have voice and internet and things like that, it takes a whole lot of bandwidth and data. So that's a big consideration. The communications between Mars and Earth. And as far as content, that's really all I have. We do have internship projects, which SCAN does, both at headquarters and Goddard. So if you're interested in space communications and want to see what it's all about, there are different mentors that study various things. So there's a wide array of mentors and things that they're focused on so they can pair you up with some people that are interested in what you're interested in. And the internships are both for the high school and at college levels. So it's definitely a good experience and a good opportunity. And then these are some of the demographics. And a lot of this is on the internet, but for our interns. So obviously a lot of them are from the Virginia and Maryland and the DC area. So and then you got some sprinkled around that are areas with different NASA centers like Texas and California, and just depending on where the different colleges are. So COVID-19 has kind of put us, we're still continuing it, but a lot of the in-person and sending people to Goddard or headquarters for the semester a lot of it's done remotely now. Hopefully, and soon we'll get back to being able to come on site and then stay here for the semester. But that's putting a little bit of a damper on that, but we're still doing the best we can through it. So if any of you guys are interested in this, I'd encourage you to go to the NASA website and the SCAN website, and you guys can research this further. And then these are the different websites and social media. We do Twitter, Facebook. These are the different usernames. And then also if you want to look into more or apply to even the SCAN internships, here's the website. All right. I think we've had a lot of good questions throughout, and hopefully we have a few more.
We do.
I'm good to stay as long as the questions come. So
okay. Okay. Well, let's go through some of these. How will the Boeing CST-100 Starliner land?
All right. So the primary way for it to land is to land actually on the ground, on the soil. They're targeting different spots in the desert in the western United States, but they have parachutes, much like the Orion spacecraft, and they have parachutes at different phases and stages coming through the undocking from station all the way when it gets into the Earth's atmosphere. Then it starts releasing the parachutes. There's, I think, 2 or so stages of that slows it down in different stages. And then it deploys airbags from underneath it, which helps initiate a smooth landing. So the combination of parachutes and airbags do a air landing. It can land in the water if it needs to, in case there's like an abort or some kind of off-nominal situation near Kennedy, or while it's making its initial ascent to space. It can abort to like land in the ocean, and they've got like different search and rescue crews and vessels that are able to go out and find them quickly.
That's great. It sounds, I mean, the technology has changed so much from that Apollo, and from Gemini, too. So someone is asking if you've ever left Earth yourself.
I have not. I wouldn't be opposed to it, but I have not. So I'm not afraid of flying or heights or anything like that. I haven't had the opportunity. So
Yeah. Another question: do you design satellites?
So I haven't designed a satellite per se, but I've worked a lot on designing spacecraft communication systems. So if you consider a spacecraft some type of satellite, then yeah, I have. It's definitely fun and challenging. Designing stuff that's meant to work in space, you have like size limitations, weight limitations, power. I mean, because you just can't go and plug into the wall. So you have to take all those things into consideration, and you have to design it to make sure it can withstand the environments of space.
In the beginning, you talked about when you moved to Florida when you were 11 years old, and how being able to watch some of those rocket launches really got you excited. Do you watch the rocket launches now? Are you able to get over to see some of those?
Well, actually, so I work on Kennedy Space Center, and my office is probably 3 miles from the launch pads. So, and then I live obviously close to it. And so I've got 2 kids. I've got a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old. So every time there's a launch, we run outside and watch it. And it surprisingly doesn't become routine. And now with the SpaceX Falcon 9 boosters that are able to come back and land at the Cape here, you hear the big sonic booms like you did during shuttle. So it like shakes the windows and everything. So it's very exciting.
Wow.
So.
There's a place in Anne Arundel County near BWI where it's a park, but it's where the planes are coming in, and you feel like you're pretty close to them, and it's just amazing to see this technology flying through the air and landing. So I can't imagine rocket launches.
Yeah, they're fun.
Yeah. Let's see. Here's a question about funding. How do you get funds for your projects, and are they varied based on the priority or a deadline?
Yeah, so all of our funding comes from like NASA headquarters, and the way NASA does it, they the government funds them, and they divide up. Like for instance, NASA has like a science area, like a mission directorate. Then they have like robotics, and then they have even like weather and aeronautics where they do airplane, and then they have like the human exploration, which is what I'm part of. Like for instance, when the Mars missions and the Mars rovers were big and trying to get done, they got a lot of money. But now since a lot of the focus has shifted, like on Artemis and putting the woman and a man back on the moon and a lot of the lunar stuff, and then hopefully the future Martian stuff, a lot of the agency and NASA focus has been put on that. So they divide it up based on, like you said, priority. So like the human spaceflight stuff is getting a lot of the priority, and then in that human spaceflight area, you have like the ISS, the commercial crew, then you have the Artemis, and we get our money scanned out of headquarters, gives us some money, but also the programs gives us money too to support. So we get our money a lot of different ways.
Okay.
Hope it never runs out.
That's right. We have a question from Facebook from Jean. Is it true we can mimic Earth's magnetosphere around Mars, and it says terraform the planet? So I'm not sure what that means, but
that I do not know.
Okay.
Wouldn't surprise me if they could, but that I don't know the answer. I don't want to guess.
Okay. We'll have to do a little more research then. Let's see, how many astronauts can travel in one space shuttle?
So it depends on the vehicle. So like the commercial crew, some of them are designed to do like 5, 6, 7. A lot of them are doing 4, just because of the room constraints, and you don't want to be too cramped. But they also can send, like, not only do they send astronauts, but they can send like new supplies for the astronauts going to it, and then also for the astronauts that are there. So they send like supplies, food, clothes. different experiments, and then they have cargo, and some of them actually have live cargo. So they have to be powered and conditioned. So like animal experiments, stuff like that. So they actually balance it out with like what kind of experiments, what kind of cargo, things like that. So I think most people or most vehicles are doing 4, but they can go more, but it just really depends on the mission and what the objectives are.
Thank you. Sterling has a question. What designs are there for protecting astronauts from radiation?
Yeah, so that's actually a good one. So with the Martian and the Mars missions, that's going to be key because they take a lot of like radiation hits or a lot of radiation as they get further and further away from the Earth. So a lot of design and considerations and um, um, like materials and the different things that can, and they actually test these things to make sure they're what they call rad hard or radiation hard, and they can resist the different radiation hits. So they have to make sure that the actual suits themselves are built to withstand that, but also they're designing the spacecraft to withstand that as well. And it's not only the suits and the spacecraft, but it's also the hardware that goes into it. So like a lot of testing for this is done like a lot of famous spot is like up in Boston, the Massachusetts General Hospital. They have like huge, like for chemotherapy, but on second shift, they do a lot of radiation testing for a lot of the space hardware there because they're used to doing all kinds of radiation therapy there. So a lot of people a lot of people actually from the different centers across the United States and all over the world go there and do radiation testing just for deep space missions to make sure that their hardware can withstand it. Because if there's radiation hits, it can like reset the computers and cause events and like upsets and put it into a state which isn't programmed for and things like that. So it's very important to develop a spacecraft and equipment and suits that can withstand the radiation.
Boy, and it really shows how expansive the collaboration is for any of the work that you're doing.
Yeah,
Working with a hospital.
especially.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you have different people in different companies and different centers that are specialized in certain things. So like Marshall Space Flight Center up in in Huntsville, Alabama, they're used to like propulsion, so they're big into like developing the launch vehicles. And then Johnson, they're big into developing the spacecraft and all the astronauts crew training, and they run all the missions from there, so they're big into that. Kennedy is obviously big into like launching and make sure the ground systems and the processing and putting it together, testing it, and then actual launching it. Goddard's big into they do a lot of their design themselves. They're big into space communications, so that's big up in Goddard, and they do a lot of the scientific stuff out of Goddard, and a lot of the collaborations with the other government agencies like NOAA and stuff to build a lot of the like GOES weather satellites, stuff like that. So Goddard's big into science and research and communications and collaboration. So each center has their own niche, but we managed to work together really nicely.
That's great. Here's a question from Ellison. Has there been any plans to explore another solar system?
I don't know of any from a human perspective, but I believe there's like scientific missions that have already left the solar system and have been transmitting data back and forth. There's obviously limitation for how long they can live and last based on like power consumption and fuel and communications and things like that. But there have been things like scientific missions and satellites that have left the solar system. Nothing human rated yet, but hopefully one day.
It's very exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. We have a question from Mark. What are the pros and cons of each machine and vessel? And how big is Orion? Because it looks kind of small.
Yeah, it looks small, and it's actually really big on the inside. So I was actually surprised because it was down at one of the processing centers here at Kennedy. So we got to look inside of it, and it was the biggest one I've seen. So like pros and cons, like some are built, like Orion is built for lunar and then hopefully Martian missions. So like the question earlier about rad harding, so a lot of that and radiation that goes into the design and the testing. So like the SpaceX and Boeing capsules that they're designing now, they're really meant for like the low Earth orbit, like around the International Space Station. So you don't have to design them. You want to build in radiation because it can really happen anywhere, but it's not as prevalent as it would be on the way to the moon or the way to Mars. So you have to design vehicles differently. So they're meant for different purposes.
That's great. Now, a question that Nicholas had before, I didn't quite get what he was asking. And he said he meant, when will the universe end and what will happen? So if you have any thoughts on the ending of the universe.
I do not, unfortunately. So I don't have that. Hopefully no time in the near future, and definitely not in my lifetime or, you know,
Yeah.
kids,
Yeah.
grandkids. That's really, hopefully not for a long, long time.
Right. That's right. Let's see. Molly is asking a couple of questions here. One is, how long will it take to orbit the Earth? How long does it take to travel to the moon by space shuttle? And then she was also just wondering, how did the name NASA, how was that chosen?
So the orbit around the, like, so instance, the International Space Station and a lot of the spacecraft that are close to it or docked to it, they orbit every 90 minutes. So every 90 minutes they see a sunset and sunrise. So that's actually pretty interesting. And so from our communications perspective, we have like the Earth kind of divided up into three main regions. So we provide communications over those three regions in a 90-minute orbit. So roughly 30 minutes per phase. What was the other question again?
How did NASA get its name?
That I do not know. I have to look that up.
Yeah.
I do not know.
You're an electrical engineer. You're not a historian, so.
Would be interesting to know, though.
Right, definitely. Let's see. Roland is asking. Oh, I think we already answered that one. How does the ISS make its own oxygen and water?
Yeah, so they have different like scrubbing systems that can clean the air and recirculate it. And then for the water, they actually are able to recycle urine. So they actually, like, they go to the bathroom and then they, through a whole cleansing and filtration process, they're able to regenerate that. And they send those filters down, actually more than occasionally, quite a bit, for like refurbishing and replacement. So
yeah, that's recycling with a capital R, right?
Yeah.
Let's see here. In the video, Andre is asking, when the rocket is orbiting Earth, does it orbit the Earth to gain speed? And if not, why does it orbit? And Andre's age 10.
Yeah, it will. So what it will do is, on the video you saw where, like, each time it went around, it kind of got more like longer and longer and longer, more like from a circle over to an oval. And as it makes those oval trips around the Earth, it'll pick up speed. And then the actual, the rocket scientists that do all the trajectory, they'll plan the exact point in time when they have to, once they get around and they get enough speed and momentum, they'll fire engines to help them change, make their course correction. So they'll get enough speed as they go all the way around, and then when they get to the point where they got to leave, they'll fire to give them more thrust, and then they'll be put onto the lunar orbit, or the lunar trajectory.
Excellent.
So, yep.
Okay, and from Mark, we have, when will the Orion launch? What is the total cost for all of these upcoming missions?
That I do not know. It's definitely more than I make, so I do not know.
But when will Orion launch?
Well, I think the first launch is summer of next year, so it's actually pretty soon. They've got a lot of stuff built up here at the Cape, and they're sending a lot of this, like a lot of the SLS rockets being built, like and was shoot up in Louisiana area, I believe. So near New Orleans. So they're actually bringing that down soon and doing testing. So it's getting real. It's getting excited.
It's great.
Yep.
Let's see. Roland is asking, do you build rockets?
So I don't build rockets. I build spacecraft that go on top of the rockets. So, well, now I do the comm systems, but I used to build the spacecraft and everything. So very fun.
It's great. How many people work on getting a spaceship to space and back to Earth? And this is from Maribel.
Quite a bit of people. So, like anything they can think of, you have people that design, that write all the different procedures to test and build it. Then you like for each individual system on the spacecraft, like the comm stuff for me, the power, the electronics, like the environmental stuff. Each of those have very large teams that go through, make sure the systems are being built up properly, tested properly, and then operate properly. So it's definitely a very large team spread across a lot of the NASA centers.
Lots of STEM jobs, right?
Oh yeah, you're at the right place.
Let's see. Do you like Star Wars and Star Trek or other science fiction? And if so, does it inspire you in your work?
I love I think I like Star Trek. Well, I can't say that. I like the newer Star Trek, and I love the old like Next Generation, and then even before that, with William Shatner and them. And I like the new Star Wars. Does it influence me? It does, because you see them. I mean, obviously, like they travel like through and about space like very easily, very without even like giving any second thought to anything. And I one day hope and think, hey, are we ever going to be like that? And versus where it takes us years and years and years to build stuff up and plan carefully. They make it look so easy. So
yeah, that can always be inspiring, I guess.
Yeah.
Let's see. Molly's asking, does NASA ever use solar power?
All the time. So on the ISS, they have solar arrays that collect power from the sun and store it. And then like the Orion, and then even like the SpaceX and the Boeing capsules, they all use solar arrays to capture. So because the more energy that you can capture and use real time out on orbit is less that you have to bring by means of like batteries and stuff like that. So it saves like on weight and helps you with power consumption. So definitely.
Great. Let's see. Nicholas is asking, has it's SETI, SETI, gotten any communication?
That I don't know. I know exactly what he's talking about, but I don't know what kind of communications they've done yet.
Okay,
so
great. Let's see. And Tim is asking, or saying that NASA isn't a name, it's actually an acronym, the National Aeronautics Space Administration. So,
correct.
Yeah. Let's see. Let's see. Roland is asking, how does the SOUZ work?
Oh, is he talking about the SOUZ? Oh, he could be talking about the Russian Soyuz, which is what took the astronauts to actually the American astronauts to and from the space station until just this last May. It works very similar. They have a launch vehicle, a rocket that launches the Soyuz capsule up. So, and they have, similar systems as we do. So, very similar.
Great. Allison is asking, how many miles above Earth does the atmosphere end?
I want to say it's 100 kilometers and 62 miles. I have to check that. But yeah, right around this between 60 and 70, I believe, miles.
Okay, interesting. And Mark is asking, when will the Gateway launch?
So that's going to be, as the first Artemis is next year, mid next year, summer time frame. as they get more into launches after that, like within like 22, 23, that's when they plan on launching in different segments and start building it up there. So very soon. Because they got to support they're doing like a boots on the moon campaign for 2024 where they want the first woman and the next crew to actually step foot on the moon. So it's very quickly within 4 years. So
Yeah,
they got to start moving fast.
Amazing. We have, it looks like we have 2 more questions. Roland is asking, what has TESS discovered? TESS.
Oh, so I can't. So the funny thing is, I actually worked on the RF systems on that, and I actually helped launch it from Kennedy, but I don't know what all is discovered yet. So I don't know if it's actually in that collecting mode or if it's still making its way. That I don't know, but I did have a good time and a fun time working on it, though.
That's great. Let's see, we have Jean asking, would it be easier to colonize the moon or Mars?
Oof. So in my opinion, I think it would be easier to colonize the moon, only because it's easier to get things back and forth. And we're going to be establishing a lunar outpost, the gateway, soon. So you can store supplies and things that you need there, and you can go back and forth between gateway and the lunar surface. And then the trip from the moon back to the Earth is definitely a lot shorter than what it is to Mars. So if there's like emergencies or you need emergency supplies, things like that. So I think it'd be easier for definitely building it up on the moon.
It looks like we have 1 more question coming in. This will be our final one from Ellison. On average, how many miles per hour do most space shuttles travel?
I thought it was around like 18,000 miles per hour. So once it gets full, it depends on where they're at in their mission phase and stuff, but it changes. But yeah, that's typical speed when it's in a coasting mode.
That's great. Well, Derek, this has been just a really wonderful and a joy to learn about all of the different kinds of parts of this NASA space network that you're doing so much work on, and this has been fascinating. So thank you very, very much.
No, and not a problem. I enjoyed it, and thanks for the opportunity and the invitation. So
it's great. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for attending, and look for the posting on Carroll County Public Library's YouTube page if you'd like to watch the program again. So thanks for attending, and thank you, Derek.
all right, take care. Not a problem.